Hello everyone and welcome to Real Life Talks. I'm your host Yvonne Heath, author of the book Love Your Life to Death and founder of the I Just Showed Up movement. So I have a very, very, very special surprise guest with me right here and now, Kathy Kortes-Miller. Hello, Kathy.
Hello. It's about time we met.
It is about time we met, and I think I'm still kind of in shock.
You and me both.
Yeah, so Kathy from Thunder Bay happened to see my van in the parking lot with Love Your Life to Death on it, and we exchanged books a couple years ago, I think, at least a year.
Yeah, about a year.
A year ago.
Yeah.
You are a hero of mine. I've wanted to connect with you, and you showed up. You just showed up.
I just showed up, and you welcomed me in, and things are happening as they should.
Things are happening. So welcome. I am so happy that you're here, and I want you to share a little bit of your journey, and I think people will very quickly understand why I am so excited to have a kindred spirit on the show.
Well, thank you, and thanks for squeezing me in. I love that this is working out.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I'm an academic. I'm a researcher and educator. I work with Lakehead University, and I'm the palliative care division lead at the Center for Education and Research on Aging and Health. But more importantly, I am someone who moves through the world and thinks an awful lot about dying and death. And in part because my clinical experience as a social worker took me to work on a hospice unit. And then I had my own experience with cancer.
Yes, and that is just a very rude awakening, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
It was, one thing to have, some pretty deep clinical experiences and some research, and then to be the person who's actually in the bed and is then receiving information from healthcare providers and being told about some of the uncertainties and all those pieces joining together.
Yes, and you had young children at home.
I did, yes. They were 5 and 6 at the time.
That is just so much to navigate through. And here, isn't it interesting though, when it is truly one thing to be on this side of it teaching?
So much so. And actually part of my role was to help healthcare providers, both healthcare providers of tomorrow and those working in clinical practice already, to work on their communication skills and to be able to talk about dying and death.
Yes. But when it's that close to home and suddenly it's like, okay, wait a minute, I am facing uncertainty. Uncertainty.
And a whole new appreciation of the vulnerability that happens when you are the person wearing that nasty hospital gown. And when you are the person who has to ask the questions of your healthcare providers, try and get them to give you the information that you need so that you can live well. Yes,
and I love that. So Kathy's written this book, Talking About Death Won't Kill You. Everybody needs this book. It is a wonderful, information and story though, and what I love so much about it is how you are open about your journey, right? You share your journey.
Well, I kind of felt like I had to. I think it gave me, this might sound a bit crass, a little bit of street cred. And so to really have an experience around navigating that. And it was one thing, again, to be part of that system. It was another thing to be a recipient within that system. And so part of my work is I get to do a fair number of talks, and people are like, we need this information in our hands. And so that's part of the reason I wrote that book.
Yes, and I love that. And I mean, we're on very parallel journeys, but they're surprising journeys. And my journey was not a diagnosis, but a son who went down a very dangerous road of drugs and addiction. And I didn't think I'd survive a tragic outcome, right? But I realized how ill prepared I was, right? For grief and for not being in control of everything. And it's sort of the same thing, right? Like I can't control all of this. And now I have 2 other little children at home. Okay, I realize how ill prepared I am. And so just like you take something that is, it's traumatic, and you create something positive out of it.
Yeah.
Yes. So amazing.
And I think we need that. And I think we learn from other people's stories.
Absolutely.
And that is the part that sticks with us. And I think ideally we can use those stories to be able to help us to move forward in different ways.
Yes. So, and I'm trying to figure out how you do everything you do, because you're teaching. What is your daily role now? Like, you're teaching in Thunder Bay.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm faculty in the School of Social Work at Lakehead.
Yes.
And so I teach. I actually just completed teaching a grad course, social work at the end of life. So
Wow. Oh,
hopefully encouraging social workers to really recognize that grief, loss, dying, and death are part of their work, regardless of the setting that they are in. And so really kind of encouraging that. And then I do research, and I just actually finished a small research study looking at physician experience with medical assistants in dying in Northwestern Ontario.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so their experience post being involved with medical assistants in dying?
Yeah. So I was interested in thinking about accessibility to good end-of-life care.
Yes.
Because I believe that is one of the things that Canadians want. And part
deserve.
Exactly.
Yes,
As
yes.
Senator Carstairs used to say, palliative care should be the right of every Canadian, right?
Absolutely, yes.
So that was part of what I was thinking and doing the research and recognizing in Northern Ontario, our accessibility to many things is different than in the rest of the country.
Very much so. And so are we taking great steps, great strides in the right direction to change that?
The accessibility piece, well, we do have access to medical assistance in dying in Northwestern Ontario, but I would say that we need to be able to increase our opportunities for good end-of-life care and access to a palliative approach to care earlier on in the trajectory. So I'd say not unlike other areas within the country, it's just because being north and being a little bit more remote, our accessibility issues are heightened.
Yes, as it is in many
rural areas
for sure. Absolutely. But going back to saying the palliative care, the trajectory, getting palliative care earlier, right? Isn't it just, I was visiting my sister in San Diego, and a friend was saying that her mother she thought that she was failing, and I think she was either 96 or 98. And I just naively said, oh, is palliative care involved? She said, I don't think we're there yet. I said, she's 98 and failing, and we're not there yet. And people still feel like palliative care is that very, very last few weeks of life. And it's so, isn't it?
It is not. It's not.
I know.
It's that holistic form of care
that
focuses on your mind, your body, your spirit, your relationships with other people. And if it happens after a serious diagnosis and things look, as I got really lucky and I'm still alive and kicking, you don't need the palliative care, that it can move away.
Right.
So it can go hand in hand with curative care in a way that unfortunately we're not seeing in our system.
And we just, and we need to keep saying it is about quality of life with a life-limiting diagnosis. And hey, if you have palliative care involved and then you don't need it, great. But then you'll also have an understanding of what it is if and when you should need it. And I think that it's like any conversation. If we talk about these things before you need it, let's diffuse the fear.
Totally.
Right? Yeah. Diffuse the fear. I'd actually said to somebody who did, I said, why don't we change the name from palliative care to something else? They said, well, because then that something else will become what we avoid. So I said, right, you're right, but we need to have these conversations, right? So palliative care is about great quality of life with a life-limiting disease, hospice care, end-of-life care, and it isn't about not being cared for.
Oh, yeah. And it's active care.
It's active. There you go.
Right?
That's so important.
One of my beefs is this idea that we call it comfort care, because that just sounds like people sit around the bed and hold hands and sing Kumbaya.
Yes.
And a palliative approach to care is one of the most active forms of healthcare.
That is huge.
Because people have to be creative. They're generally focused on time limited, and they want to provide opportunities for people to live as well as they possibly can for whatever their time is.
That is just like, I think, a huge aha moment right here and now for our society. Palliative care, hospice care, it is active care.
Yes.
They can sing Kumbaya if they want.
Of course, and being present and all that kind of stuff is important.
It's very important. However, it doesn't mean, and I do remember a patient saying, does that mean that they're not going to care for me anymore? And I said, your care is just going to take a different direction. It's just a different direction. We're going to care for you as much more, actually, than before. It's just taking a different direction, right? Okay, so now let's go back again. You are teaching full-time. And you do research. And you're traveling because you're here in Aurelia.
I'm here in Aurelia.
Okay, so what brings you to Aurelia?
So Lakehead has a Aurelia campus, and
Yes.
so we were meeting as our School of Social Work because we have faculty here, and so we've had some meetings the last couple of days. And then, of course, because in Canada we have great groups of hospices around,
Yes.
and a couple of my favorites invited me down to come talk. And I was like,
Amazing.
I'm here, so I would love to do that. Yeah.
Wow, that's so amazing. Well, I'm going to find out next time you're coming, and I'm going to make you come to Muskoka. Muskoka's very nice. We won't invite you in bug season because you won't enjoy that. But yeah, we'll definitely have to get you back. So how old are your children now?
They are now 15 and 17.
Okay, so you also have 2 teenagers.
Yes.
Oh, hence the traveling. I get it. Yeah. So back to your children,
Yeah.
because when I was writing my book, when I started my kids, I've an older son. He's now living in Kelowna, but our twins were 9, so they're now 14. They have been a part of this journey. We talk about grief. We talk about death and dying. They know how to just show up when a little classmate's mother, father, somebody, a death in the family. They know that you can't fix it, but what you can do is just show up. I have no doubt that it was difficult for your children when you had this cancer diagnosis, but I have no doubt this has been a positive journey for them as well.
It has been, and I think it's given them some resilience and
Yes.
definitely some strengths around having challenging conversations.
Yes.
And they also don't hesitate to ask for help. And because we know that there's often experiences of death and loss and grief within the classroom setting. I know my children come home and often will say, hey, Mom, this is what's going on. I want to be of help. What could I do?
Oh, wonderful.
And they recognize that power of showing up.
Yes.
And saying the person's name who might have died, or just letting somebody know that there's space for their grief.
Yes.
And that they're not going to try and fix it.
You can't fix grief.
Exactly.
Right? We can't.
Exactly.
And we don't love that.
Yeah.
We want to fix everything.
Of course. I mean, they're going to accompany them.
Yeah.
They're going to be there. Even though they can't fix it, they can't
Yes.
do anything about it, they can still be there.
And that in the last 5 years of me interviewing hundreds of people, it's just that point has been driven home so deeply, the things that have made a difference for people.
Yeah.
Hug, text, email, call, sit silently, listen.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say, but I'm here. And here's the thing, we don't need a PhD to love and to support.
No. And I really like what Thomas Attic says about the work of grief. It's moving from loving and presence to loving and absence. And so there's
I love
nothing
that.
there that needs to be fixed. It's
That's
a new
beautiful.
way of being in relationship with somebody.
That is so beautiful. Okay, see, I'm adding that to my toolbox of how we can just wrap our heads around that loss, right? And another quote that I share so much is Matthew Rattan shared at his father's funeral. He gave out these little cards, and everyone got this card, and it said, "Be the evidence that someone's life made a difference." Oh, that's a
Love
good
it.
one, right?
Love it.
And
yes.
And I think that those little nuggets of wisdom are what's going to help us through, and that we have to have conversations
About that.
about that, right? When we suffer in silos of silence and isolation, because grief, death, and dying is too painful to talk about, we compound our suffering,
Yeah.
don't we?
And I would say in part because we lack, and I'm going to use the term death literacy, because
Sure.
we're not learning about it, and
No.
we've isolated ourselves
Yes.
from it. And I would also say one of the things that we need to be paying attention to in Canada right now is developing the capacities of our communities to be able to care for us.
Yes,
And not in the way
yes.
that our healthcare providers do, but in the way that people who love us and know us do. And so I think that they need to have that
Huge.
support to just show up.
That is literally one of my greatest messages, because I connected with, in all of this, Pallium Canada.
Good, yeah.
Bonnie Tompkins, who Andrea Roylance introduced me, ironically,
Nice,
who you're going to
good.
see. Hello,
Yeah.
Andrea, thank you for that. And Bonnie, who's been so lovely, gave me the statistic that changed everything for me, because I share 7 takeaways, and one of them was that it takes a village to support those who are ill, caregiving, dying, bereaved, and each other. But I said, we don't always need a professional, but I didn't have a statistic. Pallium Canada says that in the dying process, formal caregivers will be available to us about 10% of the time or less.
Yeah.
So we need our community.
Of course.
We
Yeah.
need, and should I be in the dying process? I want my family and friends and dogs and kids and neighbors. I don't want all just paid professionals.
Yes, because professional care is episodic.
Yes.
It comes in and out.
They're there to do a task.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it can support those who love us and care for us, our family and our friends and our community. But those are the people that we want to be having in our intimate moments.
Exactly. And those are the people that should be there. And you do not need a PhD to support someone in the dying process. We need professionals and some care part of the time. We need some guidance, but we don't need a professional, and we won't have them 24 hours a day.
No.
I mean, unless you pay someone, but you know, we need to bring death back to community, don't we?
Yeah.
Oh, this is just so, just like you're fueling my passion, and I'm just trying to, like, what do we need to do? What do you think that the most important things? I mean, we're having these conversations. Do we need to go speak to the schools?
Well, I think
everywhere?
a combination. And
Yes.
so part of the piece that Bonnie probably spoke with you about was the compassionate communities,
Oh,
or compassionate cities. So
absolutely.
that's Dr. Alan Kelleher's work out of the
Yes,
UK.
yes.
And there's a charter which outlines how we can build capacity in
Yes.
communities. And so I think one of the important pieces is, and some of the feedback I get when I'm talking about this kind of thing to communities, they're like, well, we don't just want to build our volunteers, or it doesn't, we do so much already, and we recognize that caregiver burnout is such a big issue these days in Canada. But so I think we also need to pay attention to other pockets. And you mentioned in the schools. And I think death education would be a great piece in schools to be able to build the capacity of young people so that they know what to do when it happens, and they learn how to support each other. I also think we need to pay attention to how we're learning about dying and death. It's in our media, it's in our art, it's in our literature. And so how can we learn about it from those angles? And we also have to pay attention to social policy. So in Canada, we've had a big legislation change with the legalization of medical assistance in dying.
Yes.
But we also need to recognize that we now need different support from our government levels. And we know in some of the surveys that have been done, the Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association speaks to this, that our provincial governments are not paying enough attention to providing us with good end-of-life care. And so we need to make sure that as we build capacity in our communities, we also build capacity within our policies to be able to do that successfully.
Absolutely. Yes, we need both, and we need to be a voice. And I think where we really need to start is understanding and believing that we can create good deaths.
Yes.
It is possible. When I was going to write my book, I thought, I wonder if I'm qualified, or, you know, like, do I have a right to speak to this? And I started writing down the names of people that I had been involved in their dying process. And I stopped writing at 100 names, and I thought, okay, well, that gives me some basis, because some people have never even been near there. But I can tell people, and you know, it is such an honor and a privilege to be a part of that. And yes, it's hard on the heart, and you grieve and you cry.
Of course.
You said, I made a difference in that person's dying process. It's just, I want everyone to understand how incredible that can be. And we can do that. Right? Anyone can be a part of that end of life journey and walk away feeling like, wow, I made a difference.
And that end of life is meaningful.
Yes.
And it has opportunity. And we don't just see it's what happens when nothing else can be done.
Right.
But rather we have to allow natural death and recognize that there's opportunity for connection and celebration as we go about missing somebody because they're no longer physically present in our lives.
That is so extraordinary. And the thing is, when you say allow a natural death, it is truly a part of this journey. I mean, we are not, I always say to people, who here doesn't want to die? Everyone puts up their hand and said, who wants to live forever? Doesn't that sound exhausting? Like, why would you want to live forever? Like, how long you been married? You know, 499 years. I mean, you might run out of conversation.
You just might.
Right? Like, we are meant to be here, and we are here as long as we are here.
Yeah.
And we do not all die of old age, and we do not always get a warning. And that is a hard truth about this journey. But no matter what, we can make life and end of life as full as possible and as wonderful as possible. Sometimes people are here for 5 years. Some people are here for 15, and they can leave a legacy, and you will love them forever.
Yes.
That love will go on forever. let's have those difficult conversations.
Totally.
Right?
I like to channel the very esteemed philosopher John Cleese, who says that life is a terminal illness which is sexually transmitted.
There you go. Yes, that's very beautiful. Well, you know, it is what it is. And
It
the things
is.
we can also lighten it up and share those goofy, funny little stories or little because it's already serious enough,
Yeah.
right? And if we're talking about it before we are facing it,
Then there's space for that.
Then there's space for that.
When we're not in crisis, when we're not completely blown out of the water that it's happening, when we've done some of that work upstream so that when the
Yes.
time comes, we can be with that person and love that person or have those moments and not be focused on all the other things that need to happen.
Oh my goodness, we're not trying to crack codes and we're not
No.
arguing about grandma's ring and we're not having these things. So and it's funny because I had, Nicole Johnstone was from the funeral home and we were having this conversation. So everyone's probably thinking, oh no, Yvonne's going down the grief, death and dying road. There's no getting her back. But these are important conversations to have. And here's the other piece for me that I'm very passionate about. When people talk about mental health issues and it's 1 in 5, and I say, well, you know, part of that is that we are ill prepared for grief, and unresolved and unsupported grief either causes or compounds mental health issues. Because when people face grief and they have no coping skills, no strategies, they have no soft landing for themselves. I mean, it's like their brain short circuit. They don't feel like they can cope.
Yeah.
Their grief is so acute, they just don't feel like they'll get through to the other side. And we know that it's love, right? Like when you love so deeply, the price of living and loving is sometimes grief.
And imagine if we lived in communities that knew how to respond to that.
Exactly.
Like we used to have the casserole brigade, right? Where people would fill up the fridge and the freezer with all sorts of support and food in that way as that measure of saying, you've experienced some incident in your life that is causing you grief. Let us try and take care of this piece for you. And I think there's different ways that we can do that now.
Absolutely.
In our workplaces.
Oh.
Right? Can you imagine if we were in workplaces that didn't just celebrate birthdays and anniversaries, but rather when, you know, if I have to care for a sick parent, they would support me in that.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
And if there is a death within our workplace, be it a family member or one of our colleagues, that we knew what to do. And it just became part of how we were.
Absolutely. Well, and here's the problem, and this is, again, my whole message is let's talk about this before we're facing it, right? We wait till we're in crisis, and then we figure out, oh my gosh, what do we need to do? And so the workplace, again, that's one place. Like, why? People are compassionate. They just don't know what to do. They don't know what to say, so they avoid.
Yeah.
Joe walks in, his wife died. Everyone's like, oh, there's Joe. You know, he's so, sorry, I would say Joe. He probably wants to be alone. I don't want to bother him. I don't want to remind him. I think, let's just go get in there. Let's go surround Joe with love. And do you know that when I would say to people who are so afraid to do or say the wrong thing, they'd say, well, what if I make them cry? Say, well, get them a tissue. Like, well, what if I cry? Well, get yourself a tissue and cry together. We're so afraid, right, to show raw emotion or to be vulnerable. And we just need to change that.
Or we're afraid to use the person who's died name, just in case as if we're going to remind somebody who's grieving.
I promise you, they have not forgotten
they have
their
not
grief.
forgotten.
And it's okay if they cry, then they need to cry.
Sure.
Yeah. Yes, our poor little society, like people are so afraid. But again, I know people are compassionate. They're compassionate. We just need to get back to that compassionate community.
Totally. And I think we also need to figure out how to ask for help when we need it. And to recognize that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of strength.
Absolutely.
And it allows people to contribute in a meaningful way that people want to do that. They want to show up for each other.
They want to show up. And you know what I always say to people, so if your friend asked you, if your friend said, I need some help, would you be there? I said, oh, in a heartbeat. Of course I would. I said, well, then why don't you allow your friend that opportunity as well?
Yeah.
Right? And that whole badge of honor again for, well, I am strong, I can do this on my own. let's just forget that too,
Yeah.
right? Like why do we think we need to do it alone?
I'm not sure.
I do think it's because especially for women, I think back in the June Cleaver day, right? Like,
Right.
well, June, I said, June's dead, we killed her. But like, we've come so far with, rah, 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 I'm strong. And it's like, we need to get back to balance where I don't need to be everything to everybody. It's okay to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
As a woman, as a man, as a whoever, just say, I am kind of having a hard time. I'm struggling here. We need to get back to community and having these conversations. I cannot believe that you just showed up at my door. So where can people purchase your book? I want to make sure I share that.
So I was published by the fabulous ECW Press.
Yes.
It's available at Chapters on Amazon, your local bookstore, or through ECW Press.
Wow, it's everywhere. And can people connect with you? Where do you have a
Sure,
website?
I do. It's
Yes.
my Kathy KM. And I'm also on Twitter at Kathy KM.
Yes.
And just Google me. I'm on Lakehead University
She's very
website.
Googleable.
I'm
Yes.
Googleable.
I just think everything's so extraordinary. So today you already had your meetings and now you're going to hospice.
Gonna go talk to a hospice, tell them talking about death won't kill them.
Talking about death will
Head
not
to Matthew's
kill
house
them.
tomorrow, same
In
thing.
Alliston,
In
yes.
Alliston,
Wow,
yes.
that's so amazing. Well, Jordy, do you see how fast that went? He's
I
already saying
did.
that.
He's
He's saying, okay, time to go. I am so happy. We're going to hug it out, obviously.
Let's do that. Yes, please.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all the work you do. You are amazing.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate
Well,
it.
thank you so much for just showing up.
So fun.
So this has been Real Life Talks. This is about learning how to just show up for yourself, just show up for others, be empowered and resilient. So if you want to be able to just show up, my call to action is always plan your life, plan your death, and then just love your life to death. And always bring your own tambourine to the party. Thanks, bye for now.